So, good evening, everybody. Let's start with our motivation. And so even though we know when we wake up each morning that today could be the last day of our life, so far that hasn't happened, but it's not sure that it won't today or tomorrow or the next day or so on. So we really don't know how long we have to live, but we do know that it's a limited amount of time. And so it's especially important to make wise choices, set our priorities correctly, and put our energy where we really want it to go, so we don't wind up at the end of our lives with a lot of regret, a lot of bitterness or resentment because we haven't settled conflicts in our mind, or a lot of dissatisfaction at the end of our life because we haven't gotten everything we've wanted. But to be able to make peace with our lives, so we can see the value in what we're doing and really take steps to create the causes for a good rebirth, for liberation, for full awakening. So with that motivation, we'll share the Dharma this evening. So it's hard to think that today we might die, you know. It's like, well, I feel okay. How am I going to die today? Well, the president or somebody in the administration has just recommended that churches and religious institutions develop a plan in case there's a mass shooting. Well, because there's been mass shootings at different religious institutions in the past, because people are buying guns at unrecorded rates. It's really rather bizarre. So there's that. There's also, we could have some unexpected medical emergency, just something naturally going wrong in our body, and or a car accident or whatever. So the fact is, we just live in a very unstable, unpredictable situation called cyclic existence. Yeah, where we don't know what's going to happen, where we aren't in control, where so many things depend on previously created karma that we haven't purified, we don't know what it is, we don't know when it's going to ripen. And so we kind of have to be ready for anything, but not ready for anything in the sense of, I'm stressed out, vigilant, terrified, but ready for anything in the sense of, well, I've known all along my life is impermanent. I've known all along that it's important to have virtuous states of mind, and I've done my best, and now I say goodbye, And this person that I call, whatever your name is, was never a truly existent person to start with, so I don't need to get all bummed out that suddenly it's not going to be there, I don't need to think that it's totally ceasing forever and ever, because it was never solidly existent to start with. Yeah, so, if there's no truly existent person who's alive, there's no truly existent person who dies either. Yeah, so there's just this continuum, constantly changing, made of different parts, that becomes a person due to our giving it a label and conceiving of it as a person. And that's all there is to me. Yeah? So we don't need to get too anxious about, I'm dying, because there's not that kind of I to start with. You getting what I mean? Yeah, it's like we don't need to worry about the boogeyman, because there is no boogeyman. Yeah? Thinking that there's one causes us a lot of anxiety. Remember when you were a little kid and they told you the boogeyman's going to come get you? So when you think there's something that exists that doesn't exist, it produces a lot of fear and anxiety. When you realize that there's nothing there to start with, then you can relax. And, grown-ups can talk all about the boogeyman they want, and you just don't buy it. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're in this chapter of Aryadeva, Aryadeva's 400, where we're investigating the wrong conception of seeing what lacks a self as having a self. And here we're talking about it in the very gross context, because the subtle or selflessness will be talked about in chapters 9 through 16. And we're just on chapter 4. So he's dealing with pointing out, the very, very coarse kind of selflessness by pointing out the feeling of a self that is in control. Yeah, so using the example of a king. Yeah, a king is in control, so a king, it's suitable to be arrogant, to be conceited, because they have power and control and wealth, and they can make things happen and do anything that they want. Okay, and Aryadeva's in the process of shattering this notion by showing that actually a king only has power because people give them power. In this case, the people long time ago needed somebody to protect their fields from theft, so they hired somebody to protect the fields, called that person a king. The king got paid, because he was an employee of the people. He got 1/6 of their harvest, and that's how somebody became a king. So it's, no big deal at all. Okay, but since we forgot all of that, then we think that being a king is a big deal. So as I explained before, that we don't have to think about kings here. We can think about presidents, we can think about CEOs, we can think about abbots and abbesses, we can think about movie stars, we can think about team captains and sports stars and Wall Street people, or, whatever job you have, whoever your boss is, or just, what society in general terms is successful. Anything we have that we can get arrogant over. which is about anything. Yeah, we can get arrogant about, I have the best dining room chairs. Yeah. And we will get arrogant about that. Yeah. Okay, so right now we're on verse 86. Okay, this chapter started with 75, so we're on 86 right now. We've had Geshe-la's wonderful teachings in the interim between today and the previous teaching. So some of you have heard these verses before. One thing that I realized from Geshe-la's teachings is that I had completely forgotten to give the outline for the preceding chapters, which I think would have helped make some of the verses clearer. So I apologize for that. And hopefully some of you noticed it and may have, been looking in the book at the outlines yourself, but now I kind of have them, although I'm not going to go into the first has 2 and the second has 3, and I'm just going to give the key heading points. Okay, so verse 86, again Joe Blow is here, and he says, since protecting people is a cause for high rebirth, and therefore a religious practice, a king needs no other practice. So Joe Blow's making the case for why a king has the right to be arrogant, okay? Because the king's job is to protect people. That's a cause for high rebirth. Therefore, it's a spiritual practice. And the king doesn't need any other kind of dharma practice because he's just virtuous because he's protecting the people. Okay? So Aryadeva says, if giving proper protection is a ruler's religious practice, why would the toil of artisans too not be religious practice? In other words, if it's the ruler's religious practice to protect the people and he gets paid, a certain percentage of their crops, then what about the work of the people who make the moat around the town, who build the weapons, who, do all the other things that are needed to protect the people? Wouldn't their work also become a religious practice? Wouldn't it become dharma practice? Because they're equally protecting the people. And if you look at what they're doing as religious practice, then why wouldn't any job that anybody is doing become dharma practice? Okay, and so why does the king have to be arrogant about this? Because the king is actually just a man who's hired to protect the town. That's all. So what Aryadeva's doing here is he's refuting that violent actions are religious activity. And specifically in this verse, refuting that protecting the people by punishing the unruly is a religious activity. Okay? So that's saying, the king protects people by punishing unruly people, so he should be arrogant. And so then Aryadeva says, well, why aren't the artisans and the people who make the weapons also doing religious practice? And why isn't everybody doing religious practice? Okay, so he's going to get into a little bit more this thing about the king doing negative actions and how people are kind of whitewashing that and saying, but because he's the king, it really is dharma practice. Okay, so again, here we have Joe Blow in verse 87 who says, since an intelligent king protects his people out of attachment, he's irreproachable. So the word attachment here it's a word in Tibetan that sometimes can mean like loving concern and sometimes can mean like really strong attachment. Yeah, but even if it's an intelligent king who protects his people out of concern, then Joe Blow's saying, therefore, he's irreproachable. Whatever he does has got to be virtuous. Okay, and Aryadeva says, this example shows the ruler on whom the people rely as reprehensible, not irreprehensible, not irreproachable. The excellency attachment to existence as mother of all those in the world. Okay, so being a ruler on whom the people rely for protection is actually a source of arrogance and recklessness. Because if you look, you can rationalize it, oh, the king really cares for the people and is taking care of the people because he has such a kind heart. But actually what's going on in the ruler's mind is, I've got to defend my position, and somebody's, threatening my position by threatening my people, by threatening my land. And so I'm going to respond violently to protect everything that is mine. Yeah? Even if it is my people. Okay? So what Aryadeva is saying is that, being in that leadership position, you are faced with a lot of very, very difficult decisions, whereby you have to protect your people. And in the process, you are going to create a ton of negative karma. Yeah? And so think about it sometimes. I mean, you think, like people go, oh, the President of the United States, he has so much power. Well, actually, looking at how this government works, he has very little power. Yeah, and yet he's faced with making decisions that involve such deep kind of karma that he's going to experience the consequences of. And he's probably very unaware of what those consequences are, And you look at, all the different rulers of different countries, and they're just looking in terms of this life. They don't have some idea of karma and, what's the ethical dimension of my actions. They're just thinking, how can I protect my people, because that's my responsibility, and I have to do it in order to keep my position and my wealth and my reputation. Okay? And so Aryadeva is saying, the wise ones who see things without error regard attachment to existence, which is what the ruler has, as the mother of those in the world because it produces them. So here is, when we're talking about the mother of the world, we're talking about the 8th and 9th links of the 12 dependent arisings of craving and grasping, which are both forms of attachment. Okay? And so they're what make the karma ripen at the time of death, So they keep samsara going. And when we study the Four Noble Truths, under true cause, the example they give that we always think about is craving. Yeah, craving is the true origin of suffering because, it propels us to keep wanting one thing after another thing. Okay? And so the wise ones see that this kind of craving and attachment is something that perpetuates samsara. Yeah? So it's not like, oh, the king is so virtuous because he has this kind of attachment towards his people. Okay? So the king is fulfilling his self-interest in the process of, quote, quote, serving the people, and that therefore is reprehensible because his motivation is not one out of genuine concern, it's out of self-serving attachment. Okay, you think that applies to leaders? When you've been in leadership position, have you done things that look like you're helping other people, that you say that you're doing to help other people, but at the end of the day, it's to preserve your position or your reputation or, to make things go the way you want them to. Okay? Then Joe Blow comes up again in verse 88, and he says, because of his compassion a king's protection of his people is his religious practice. So it's not just his concern and attachment to the people, it's his compassion. The king is so compassionate. So it's his religious practice. So therefore he has the right to be arrogant because he's doing this great and lofty religious practice. Okay? So Aryadeva says to that, the sensible do not acquire kingship. Since fools have no compassion, these merciless rulers of men, although protectors, are irreligious. Okay? So the sensible people, you know, those people who value karma and its effects, who strive to purify their mind, who don't turn away from virtuous paths, and who aren't attached to power and wealth. You know, people like that don't desire worldly power and wealth. Yeah, they don't desire to become a king or a ruler or a big boss or worldly, you know, successful in a worldly way, because they're not interested in power and wealth and status and so on. So those are sensible people who have some understanding of samsara and don't want to get involved in it. So the people who have no understanding of samsara, who don't have any understanding of the ethical dimension of our actions, who don't think that they're going to experience results of their actions at the time of death and in the future life, these people are fools. Yeah? And these people have worldly power, and they use it to help their friends and harm their enemies. Okay? So they kill people, they steal from people, they make unfair laws, unfair taxes. They do all sorts of, make biased policies and so on to hold on to and expand their worldly power and wealth. Okay, so this verse is emphasizing the reason why it's not a religious activity, why protecting the people isn't a religious activity, is that it's a basis of pride and carelessness. Yeah, so you can see, you know, somebody has power and they say, I can do this, I can do that, you know, I can do all these shady deals, nothing bad is going to happen to me. Yeah, and so they become quite careless, they lack conscientiousness, they become reckless, and so on. There was just an article in the paper today about how interesting it is that certain politicians have had incredible scandals go on about them, and they continue to get reelected. Yeah. That, you know, and so not only is the politician foolish and not caring about karma and its effects and having their own integrity, but actually the population who keeps electing them is equally as foolish. Although the article was saying that some of these people are running in counties where there's a lot of evangelical Christians, and that evangelical Christians love stories of redemption. You know, so a politician who did bad and then beats his breast and says, I'm a sinner and I'm reformed and now I'm going to serve the people. You know, that they love that and vote for him. And what do you think happens afterwards? More of the same, yep. Okay, so verse 89, Joe Blow again is speaking up here on the side of kings and rulers and the successful ones, saying that the treatises by sages say that even if, owing to the code of the royal caste, a king acts violently, he hasn't performed a misdeed. Okay, so there's all these kind of social treatises that were written by rishis, supposed sages that actually weren't so sage, yeah, that say, that even if a king does violent actions, it's still a religious activity. He hasn't done anything negative because he's just doing what is expected of somebody from the royal caste. So he's keeping his societal, his obligations to society. Yeah, I mean, because somebody in the royal caste, that's their obligation, is to, rule and to lead the army, and so to be violent, he's just doing his job in society. So it's not it's not a misdeed what he's doing. So Aryadeva says, sages' activities are not all actions that the wise perform, for there are inferior, mediocre, and superior ones. Okay, so just because a sage says it's okay to do it doesn't mean that it's an action that the wise people perform, because there are inferior, mediocre, and actually wise sages. Sage isn't a good word. It's more maybe like a social commentator. Yeah? Okay? So if we update it to our experience now, you look at the people who are social commentators, who write the editorials, who write the op-ed columns, and things like that. Okay? So some of them really have compassion and think clearly. I'm thinking of Nicholas Kristof. He's really quite good. And then others just say the most outrageous, ridiculous things. Yeah? And so what Aryadeva is saying is, don't believe everything you read in a newspaper. Yeah? Or don't believe everything you read in some kind of text supposedly written by somebody who's wise, because that person may not, in fact, be wise. And if we look throughout history at, some of the great political philosophers or economic philosophers, yeah, some of them have had excellent ideas, and some of them, their ideas have led to incredible violence and deprivation and poverty and exploitation in society. Yeah? So just because somebody is a supposed great philosopher and wrote a book doesn't mean that what they say, is anything good. We should use our common sense. Yeah. So this verse is emphasizing that not everything stated by social commentators should be taken as valid. Yeah. So we should also, a good example of this thing of, here's this thing of, well, the king is just doing what's expected of him in society according to his job, so even if he's violent, it's not negative. Yeah. So then you look at authoritarian regimes. Yeah. You look at Nazi Germany, or you look at Stalin's Russia or Mao's China, and how people did things because the leaders told them to, and because the social philosophers of that time said this was a good thing to do, and people just did it without thinking, and look what happened in those totalitarian lands. Yeah, but people just said, but I'm just doing my job. I'm a soldier, this is what I was instructed to do. Yeah, people in the military know that. You're not supposed to, go against what your commander says, even if you think it's wrong. Yeah, and so the populace and soldiers and, people just follow what they're told to do because they're doing their duty. Yeah, and so you can see the damage that comes about because of this. Yeah, and so for a leader to consider themselves special and spectacular because they have the social commentators agree with what they're doing, and they have the power to make everybody miserable by enacting miserable policies. That's not a reason to be arrogant, is it? Okay, verse 90. Joe Blow's talking again. And he says, because past kings who took these social treatises to be valid looked after their people well, these treatises must be valid. Okay? So the past kings followed those treatises, they looked after their people well, so what the treatises say must be valid. So this is somebody really naive, isn't it? Yeah? So Aryadeva says, virtuous rulers of the past protected the people like their children. Through the practices of this time of strife, it is now like a waste without wildlife. So yes, there could have been virtuous rulers in the past who really guided the people well. Like you look at King Ashoka, and he instituted certain policies that really turned people's minds towards virtue, and he had them, build a lot of infrastructure, and he taught them how to care for each other and so forth. So that could, exist. But nowadays, kind of the rulers don't do those things. And so it's not certain, Aryadeva is saying, it's not certain that if people follow these social treatises, that they're going to be happy. Okay? So former virtuous and wise leaders, for example, universal monarchs who protected the people like their own children, they increased happiness and prosperity. Okay, but those who rely on the practices of our degenerate times devastate the world, making it like a wasteland without wildlife. Yeah, and I was a history major in college, and the thing that I remember so vividly, the one thing that I learned from studying history, is like in Europe, in every generation, people were killing each other in the name of religion. Yeah? So it's this thing like, instead of the social commentators, you had the religious commentators. And the religious commentators said, do this, and it's good for the religion. And people followed, and they created a tremendous negative karma. Yeah, I mean, you look at the Crusades, the whole reason for that was supposedly religion, but it was really just for power and wealth. Yeah, and all in Europe, really, every generation, they were fighting in the name of religion, but it was so often about power and wealth. And even nowadays, you have some of the treatises written by people from different radical philosophies, and every religion nowadays has their own fundamentalists. Yeah, people tend to think, the Islamic fundamentalists, but the Jews have fundamentalists, the Christians have fundamentalists, the Hindus have fundamentalists. All these people do writings, and when people live by those writings, it creates so much havoc in society. In India, you have the rise of the BJP party, the Hindu nationalistic party, and then you started having so much more violence against Muslims in India and much more interreligious strife. If you look in Burma, what's happening now, this one monk, who is speaking, using Buddhism as a nationalistic thing and encouraging people in violence towards Muslims. Then you have all the Islamic fundamentalists, encouraging people to go out and be a martyr, and that, you're going to wind up in heaven through killing in the name of God. And you have the same thing, different Christians think like that. And then you have the people, like Timothy McVeigh, and the Unabomber, Ted, whatever his name was, Kaczynski, was it? And he did a lot of writing about social theory and stuff like that. So you have all these people who have some kind of religious theory, social theory, they get everybody excited, and they create havoc. Okay, so Aryadeva's point here is that the happiness of the people is not assured by taking all these writings, religious or social writings, to be valid. Yeah, because you wind up you know, whenever there's war in a society, even you win the war, your society is destroyed and people, so many people suffer. You know, people usually think, oh, if you win the war, well, that's great, you got your way and you're victorious. But, I mean, how much suffering do people go through to win a war? Yeah? I've often thought that it would be quite interesting to have a conference with all the fundamentalists, because they would all agree on many things, you know? I mean, they just disagree on the details. But they would all agree, you know, my way's right, everybody else's way is wrong. I have God on my side. Yeah? So also, you know, what this verse is, if you really think about it, is institutionalized and legal prejudice. Yeah? You get, you know, even in our country, what do I say, even in our country, like it's surprising. But, you know, in our country, you have institutionalized racism. You have legal racism. Yeah? I mean, that's what, you know, the Jim Crow era was about. And even when they tried to pretend it wasn't legal and institutionalized, you know, the effect was, you know, still inequality and a lot of suffering. Yeah. So, you know, people can have all those social theories, like the separate but equal. You know, that was the whole rationalization for racism. You know, in the U.S., yeah, it's separate and equal, and so we have separate and equal schools and drinking fountains and everything else. But the point was, it was separate, but it wasn't equal. Yeah. So. Yeah, and then, I mean, even you look at, like, what the Supreme Court's decision about the Voting Rights Act, you know, it's institutionalized racism, because it's going to deprive a lot of minority people of the ability to vote. Yeah, they were saying that, like, I forget which state it was, if it was Texas or some state, there's like 250 polling places, but you needed to be able to show your driver's license. But in the whole state, there were only like 71 places where you could go to get a driver's license. So there might be a polling place near you, but there wasn't a place to get a driver's license near you. Yeah, and so then can't vote. Yeah, so and then, you know, it's rationalized because it's presented as you know, preventing voter fraud. So isn't this good that we have this? But actually it's not good. So, you know, just because something is a social theory, just because the Supreme Court or any court, you know, decided on it, doesn't mean that it's going to produce happiness in the society, doesn't mean that it's something good. I mean, the point is we have to think for ourselves, you know, and not just go along with, you know, what is popular in society, but really hold our own ethical principles as foremost and live according to them.
So the people that are 80 years old that doesn't drive, doesn't have a license, can vote?
Yeah, well, they supposedly can vote, but how's a person who's 80 years old who doesn't drive going to get to a DMV to get even a state-authorized ID? They can't, you know. Or if you're poor and you live in a rural area, how are you going to... And you don't have a car?
Well, how are you going to afford it?
Yeah.
When you're trying to feed your kids.
Right. Yeah, to even pay for the gas or the bus fare, or to, you know, you're trying to scrimp by, so you're working every job you can get. How are you going to take off the time to go get a driver's license in a place that's 200 miles away? Yeah. So, I mean, we live in a rural county, and we know from our own experience it's not easy when we have to go to renew our driver's license, is it? Yeah, there's 1 day a week, and you go, and the line is like miles long. Yeah, and it takes you ages to get through. So, yeah, we know that. Yeah, and so imagine like living here. I mean, we fortunately have a car. If we didn't have a car, how would we even get a state certified ID? Living where we live, forget it. Yeah, you couldn't do it. Okay, then verse 91. Joe Blow again says, the treatises state that it is not irreligious even if a king harms his enemies when the occasion to do so arises. You know, because again, referring to these treatises is, you know, because somebody who's supposedly wise wrote it, it must be true. And the king, even if he uses violence to harm his enemy, it's not something negative, because that's what the king's supposed to do. And you know what? What else do you expect from the king? Why would you have a king that didn't attack back, or that didn't start a war in the name of defending the country? Yeah. So Aryadeva says, if a king who seizes the occasion to harm is not doing wrong, then others too, such as thieves, have not done so in the first place. So if a king isn't doing a negative action by seizing the occasion to start a war or fight back in a war or kidnap people or, kill their own citizens or, do any number of things. So if that's not irreligious, then why is what a thief does considered bad? Yeah, why is what, some ordinary person's negativity is considered irreligious, but a king who's doing the same thing, killing or stealing, on a huge scale, that's considered valid, but an ordinary person does it and it's considered illegal. So that's why Aryadeva said that. So if a king seizes the occasion to harm the enemy or someone who has acted improperly, if that isn't wrong, then others like thieves have not done wrong. Okay? A thief finds an occasion to strike at somebody rich first, and then later the king finds an occasion to strike back. So, yeah. So finding an occasion to strike is finding an occasion to harm. Yeah, so it doesn't matter who's doing it. Yeah, so here Aryadeva is stressing that violence towards enemies is not a religious deed. Yeah, but really, you look at the Crusades, and so many wars. I mean, in the past, present, in the name of religion. It is religious. You will be born in heaven by, blowing yourself up and taking a lot of the enemy with you. And so there's these incredible, I just think in Iraq and so many places throughout the Middle East, people are just going shopping in the market, and then there's somebody who decides to blow themselves up and take all these innocent people with them. And that's considered virtuous. So, yeah, and then of course, if the government does it, then you say it's okay. Yeah, unless you don't like that government. Yeah, so you look at our policy towards the Middle East, when we liked Assad, like his father did this horrendous massacre many years ago. I forget how many people were killed. But, his father was our friend, so we didn't say anything about it. Yeah. And now we decided, okay, we don't like Assad, so now what he's doing is, the son is wrong. But I'm sure if he turns out victorious, then in the civil war, then, we'll back him again and he'll be a friend, and he's only policing the state. Yeah? Yeah. I mean, did you know that our country supported Osama bin Laden against the Russians?
Didn't the U.S. provide the arms?
Yeah.
Trained him.
Yeah. Provided the arms and trained him. And a lot of those people who later became, turned against the U.S. But, it was considered virtuous to do that because we wanted to defeat the Russians. Yeah? So helping your friends, harming your enemies is virtuous. And when your enemy and your friend change places, then it's the principle's still virtuous, even though you're, helping a different person and harming a different side than you did before. So it's just showing how in samsara, how foolish we are. We're really, people are very foolish and don't understand karma, don't have solid ethical principles. And I remember the first Dharma course I went to, Lama Zopa was teaching, and he was talking about this whole thing of helping your friends and harming your enemies. And he said, that's what most people in the world do. And that's what you're supposed to do. And that's what we're brought up to do, isn't it? I mean, our parents all teach us, help your friends, harm your enemies. And that's what society teaches us. And that makes us a good person. And Rinpoche said, that's what animals do. And I remember going, he's absolutely right. Animals help their friends and harm their enemies. He said, helping your friends and harming your enemies is nothing special. It's not a virtuous action. Even animals do it. Yeah. And except animals don't harm their enemies as much as human beings do. Yeah, one dog will chase away another dog, but he won't kill the dog. Yeah. Yeah.
And then too, when you think about in societies where you rise up against the non-virtue, how hard that is, and it's quite. I remember in the '60s how difficult that was.
Yeah. So, when you're trying to rise up against the non-virtue, it's very difficult. And so you're speaking of the 60s, and how difficult it was, and how so easily you adopt the same mind state as the people you're protesting against. Yeah? So it's not just difficult to rise up with a virtuous way, but it's difficult to keep that virtue in the confront of what happens. Because I remember being in a Vietnam War protest at UCLA, and the guy next to me picked up a rock and threw it at the cops. And I froze, and I went, whoa, this is exactly what we're protesting against. Yeah? Is violence. Yeah, so it's hard to keep a virtuous intention, and like that. Very difficult.
I think the other tricky excuse that's often given is also the defending human rights. It's the idea that we'll bomb the fundamentalist state to liberate women and children.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. So in the absence of God, then in the name of human rights, we will bomb a fundamentalist state or fight a war in a fundamentalist state to liberate the people who are being oppressed there. But it's very difficult, isn't it? Because if certain states really, the people there have no human rights. You want to be able to help them. But then if the tactics you use are the same violent tactics that they're using, then what? Yeah, then what? So the question is, how do you produce change in society without violence? Yeah, and that seems to be, so many people think that it's not possible to change society without violence. Yeah. I was thinking of, you know, how Bill Clinton said that the one regret that he had, well, maybe one of the regrets he had, was that he didn't intervene in the Rwanda crisis to stop the massacres there. And so that's why he was encouraging Obama to send troops to Syria. Yeah. And I was thinking, well, yeah, that's exactly how political leaders think. The way you stop people from massacring other people is you arm the people who are getting massacred so they can fight back. Yeah, and there didn't seem to be any other kind of strategy for how you stop massacres, you know? And you can see that it is hard, because in a situation like that where hundreds or maybe even thousands of people are getting killed each day, you want to do something quick to end the violence. But then in doing something quick that's aimed to end the violence, sometimes you're increasing the violence, aren't you? Or perpetuating the violence. So it's not an easy thing. So that's why Aryadeva said the sensible people don't want to be kings. Yeah? Really, very, very difficult. Very difficult. I wouldn't want that kind of responsibility, you know, where I knew in terms of karma, or just even in terms of present human suffering. Okay, then the verse 92, Joe Blow says, by defeating the enemy in battle, one acquires wealth and pleasures, and that also pleases the king. Okay, so you get wealth and you please the king, and you know, have all these good things by winning a battle, by, you know, conquering the enemy in battle. And if you die for the king in battle, you will have a high rebirth. Therefore, a king should take pleasure in warfare. Joe Blow's really getting extreme. I mean, doing everything he can to try and prove that a king has a right to be, you know, to be arrogant. So a king should take pleasure in warfare, and people who fight for the king should be very happy, because what they're doing pleases the king. They're getting wealth for the country, and even if they die, they're going to have a good rebirth. It's the propaganda that young people get fed, you know, that makes them join the army. Isn't it? Yeah? Or makes, you know, young men all over the planet join whatever cause there is in their own country. It's this promise of, you know, you're doing something bigger than yourself, that's valuable for society, that pleases the leader, that's virtuous, and it's going to bring you heaven, you know, in the next life, and you'll be a hero in this lifetime. And the young people believe it. Yeah? So, what Aryadeva says, if giving all one has for liquor and so on is not an offering, why consider it an offering to give oneself in battle? In other words, if giving all you have for liquor, gambling, sleeping around, okay, if that isn't an offering that pleases the excellent ones. And if it's non-virtuous, okay, then why would giving your life in battle out of anger and greed be an offering to please somebody, to please the excellent? Okay, you getting what he's saying? You know, in other words, if normally if we look, if somebody was giving their all to get drunk and drink and drug and gamble and have sex, and they're thinking, oh, but that's an offering that pleases the excellent. But we look at it and we say, that's non-virtuous. Okay, so what's the difference between that and somebody who would give their life in battle out of anger and greed with the idea that now I'm pleasing the king, or I'm pleasing the country, or I'm pleasing the president, or whoever it is? Wouldn't that be equally as non-virtuous? Yeah? Okay, so for what reason would you take a good rebirth by doing this? How would killing the enemy lead you to take a good rebirth? You know, he's saying killing is killing. Yeah? It doesn't matter who it is. Sacrificing your life in battle for a bad king is not an offering. That implies that sacrificing your life is for a good king is an offering. But then, if we think, you know, would a good king ask you to sacrifice your life in battle? Okay. So the point of this verse is dying in battle isn't a cause for a happy migration, you know. And so a king is not, it's not an honor and privilege to die in battle, and a king isn't virtuous for asking people to do it. Yeah. You know, just throughout history you look, and there's always this myth of valor in battle, you know, that by using your physical strength to harm somebody, that way you're proving yourself, you're victorious, it's honorable, you're distinguished. Yeah? And I just look at it, and in my book, using violence to solve a conflict doesn't make any sense. Yeah? And I don't understand how. I mean, war is bloody and messy and awful. And, you know, in every war throughout history, they sanitize it beforehand and talk to people about the valor and heroism. And I think it inspires people because it is this idea of joining a movement that's beyond yourself. You know, I think people really sincerely want to be involved in something that is bigger than themselves. You know, we want to help other living beings. We want to feel like we can contribute to society. And so often, violence is used as the way to show people how you contribute to something bigger than yourself. And it doesn't matter if it's, you know, the military in the country or in a gang. You know, I mean, why do young people join gangs in the inner city? You're part of something that's bigger than yourself. You're defending your turf. You're defending your own people against the enemy. So even though the whole thing is totally, you know, created by the human mind, this street is mine and that street's yours, and, you know, I have to revenge you because you killed one of mine. The whole thing's just made up by the human mind. But people feel there's some honor, something wonderful in it because it's bigger than themselves. And I think what we're trying to do in Dharma practice is also do something bigger than ourselves. But we're trying to do something that's going to bring actual happiness for self and others that is bigger than ourselves. Yeah? So we're creating a boot camp in virtue. Yeah. Yeah. Where you've got to tame your anger. Yeah, instead of taming the external enemy, we're taming the internal enemy. Yeah. But I think, people really have this sincere wish, but all society has to offer you is kind of a dead end, isn't it? Because most people don't think about, how can you be a soldier against non-virtue? Real non-virtue, meaning the internal enemy. Yeah? So because people don't know, then they're looking for something outside themselves. Which you can't blame them for, but it certainly, they get cheated.
And I've talked to some genuinely peace-loving men, I'll put this on men, about this very thing, and like the romanticism of the sword and the dragon,
Yeah.
and blah, blah, blah. And over I hear about this battle of good and evil. So it's this thing that's bigger than themselves. And the guys I talked to about this, it's like to be the good guy over the evil thing. So it's putting it all out there, but that's
Yes.
what makes it good. It's like demonizing whatever the evil is,
Right.
whether it's the force of evil or the next country.
Yeah.
And so that is so deep in us.
Yeah. Yeah, very deep that what you're saying is like evil is outside in those people who are doing that. And so we're the virtuous ones that are attacking, and isn't it wonderful what we're doing? And it is bigger than ourselves, and we're protecting the innocent and converting the people who have been deceived by their governments or by their whoever it is. But not realizing the non-virtue that's being created by doing that. Yeah, and then that's where you really have to look at people like Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela and His Holiness, and people who really talk about nonviolent struggle, and how much courage it takes to do that. Real courage, because you are risking your life being nonviolent. And you're also risking other people telling you you're an idiot. Or what Gandhi did. Incredible. Yeah, but he got killed for it. And so did Martin Luther King. Yeah. So, yeah. Difficult.
Any kind of conviction. It's that, I think, when I think about those men, the kind of, and it's not just men, there are lots of women who are not so well sewn, who've done it too, but the kind of conviction that knows that no matter what society says, that nonviolent stance is right.
Yeah.
That's a unique mind.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. To keep that nonviolent stance no matter what. Very difficult. Very difficult. Yeah.
The one thing that really struck me while studying history also was to see that in every period of transition, there would be a moderate group starting to emerge, and often the leader gets assassinated very early, or they're all forced to take sides.
Yeah.
Even during the Reformation, I remember at a certain point you had to say you were Protestant or Catholic, and you could not be in the middle and say, actually, I don't want to take sides.
Right.
You just get ostracized.
Right. Right. This was what happened to Thich Nhat Hanh in Vietnam. Yeah. Both the communists and the South Vietnamese didn't like him because he said, I don't want to take sides. I want peace in this country. Yeah. Very difficult. Okay. So we will continue on. Okay, so we'll start with verse 93 next time. When you read sometimes stories, biographies or autobiographies of people who have lived through really difficult times in history. I remember I did a lot of reading about the Cultural Revolution and the communist takeover in China. And You know, what happened to people's minds when the whole society is thinking in a certain way and you kind of have a whole society that's gone crazy? Mm-hmm. Yeah, very difficult.
I think that shows how important ethical conduct is, because if that gets thrown away, it goes crazy,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, yeah, it's true. If ethical conduct gets thrown away, the society goes crazy. But in a crazy society, to try and keep ethical conduct, very difficult. Yeah, so much pressure from outside. No. And everybody wants to live. Yeah, so people say, well, I don't really want to do this, but if it's my life, then,
Or my children's life.
yeah, or my children's life, then, you know, what am I supposed to do?